Our keynote speaker has been a frequent guest on the Full Disclosure Network. Like General Washington, he has been a role model and a leader who selflessly offered his services to solve catastrophic problems. Our speaker today has aided many government entities fix major financial disasters and done it completely without the fanfare and hurrahs from the media. As the Chief Investment Officer for Guggenheim Partners, he emerged as an important community leader behind his firm's purchase of our Los Angeles Dodgers, restoring and assuring the respect and positive contribution of that major league franchise. He is committed to forging the rebirth of financial stability in the city and the region. He has stepped forward as the leading financial expert, sounding the alarm to warn us of the dangers ahead with the massive unfunded pension and health care benefits of our public employees. Here is Scott Minerd with his talk, Remembering George Washington, the Father of our Country.
Well, it's always a privilege to work with Full Disclosure. Leslie and TJ have done some incredible work here in LA, and I think we need to get behind them and help them continue to do this work, because there is no other outlet to get this done. This week we are celebrating the 281st anniversary of the birth of George Washington. He is remembered for his service to the nation, whether that be the French and Indian War, where he was a commander in the war, is his role as the supreme military commander during the American Revolution, or that role as the first president of the United States, which garnered him the title as father of our country.
Scott pointed out that unlike today's politicians, General Washington was very hesitant about taking on the role of a political leader.
But one of the most interesting things about Washington was his refusal to perpetuate his own power. He resigned twice. First, he resigned as the supreme military commander of the U.S. in 1783, and then again as the president in 1796.
This was not because he was shy or timid. General Washington was dreadfully aware that his country was navigating in uncharted waters and that the purpose of his fight against England may be lost in winning the war.
Washington realized that what follows the revolution counts more than the revolution itself, and that there were no guarantees of what might be in the future. Therefore, he laid out the pillars of what needed to support what he called the glorious fabric of our independency and national character.
The pillars Washington identified were, number one, a permanent and enduring union of states under one federal government. Number two, a sacred regard to public justice. And number three, adoption of a proper peace establishment. And number four, peaceful and friendly disposition among the people to forego their local prejudices and make mutual concession for the general prosperity. And it was this fourth pillar that concerned him greatly.
Washington spoke out against sectionalism, factions, and parties, and designing men who would promote such things to advance their own personal agendas and power and influence. What causes a man to behave as Washington did? Today, we take for granted the smooth transition of power from one administration to the next. In 1796, there was little precedence for a national leader willingly to lay down power. History is replete with leaders who, once attaining the position of power, were loath to pass it on. Given the concerns he expressed at the time, he resigned his council in 1783. He easily would have claimed power for the good of the nation to help guide it through a period of transition, as many liberators have done in their so-called democratic revolutions, but he would not. Need I proceed to further examples of ambitious men who have exploited popularity, military power, or revolution to advance their own personal agendas. Let it suffice that whether it be Napoleon or Putin, that a lengthy discourse of each example is unnecessary, as I am sure that this audience, living with our current government, understands the tyranny of petty men and the temptations of power in light of the frailty of the human estate. So what is different about Washington that allowed him to avoid these pitfalls of political ambition and to set himself at the head of the pantheon of leaders as the great example which so often has inspired others to take up the cause of freedom and liberty? I believe that Washington tells us in his own words. In his presidential farewell address, he states explicitly, quote, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports."
Can you imagine what would happen to a political leader today who would suggest that religion and morality are the keys to political prosperity? The ACLU and the modern media would mobilize an army of gays and transvestites to harass them off the political stage. Scott quoted Washington, who believed that religion and morality are the keys to justice.
Where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths, which are the instruments of investigation in our courts of justice? And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Could Washington survive, let alone lead effectively in today's politically correct society? I fear he could not. The scrutiny of the press and the unmerited political attack from diverse factions would make any attempt at popular election, especially in a city like Los Angeles, a daunting challenge. Yet, we have never needed him more. His perceptive insight into human nature and his unassailable personal character are the very attributes we so desperately need from our leaders today. As Washington went on to say, quote, "Virtue and morality is a necessary spring of popular government."
In contrast to the concepts advocated by Washington, Scott pointed out what is lacking in our current political leaders.
The source of our great political malaise today lay not in the halls of power. Those who serve there are energized by diverse factions who stumble blindly without enlightenment. Washington believed that religion and morality were best protected through the education of its citizenry. Education was no threat to religion or faith, but the foundation on which free peoples may find true knowledge and freedom. He believed that education itself would lead people to ponder the deeper meaning in issues, expose hidden agendas, and embrace true religion and morality.
Scott quoted from the Old Testament book of Hosea from over 2,500 years ago.
Quote, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." He, like Washington, went on to point out the dangers of ignorance, because Hosea's leaders had rejected the knowledge of God and his laws, and that the blessings would eventually be removed from the land unless they repented. Washington himself, in his Thanksgiving proclamation, issued by order of the United States Congress, entreated the nation to, quote, "unite in most humbly offering our prayers and supplications to the great Lord and ruler of the nations, and beseech him to pardon our national and other transgressions, and to render our national government a blessing to all the peoples.
Can you imagine our current president issuing such a proclamation? He would be ridiculed by the mainstream media from coast to coast. But Scott sees that reaction as the cause of our current decline as a nation.
I believe that if Washington were here today, he would identify our failures to recognize the true source of our blessings and the collapse of the morality of our society as the source of our current state. He would encourage an honest and open discussion of the issues at hand and would return to education and embrace morality and religion rather than fearing it. I believe that he would ask us all to search our own souls for where we have abandoned the path of justice and integrity, and surrender ourselves to that divine ruler upon which he so openly relied. Then, I believe, we will find our way. Then, I believe that our paths will become clear. And then, I believe, we may hope that in our time, we might find our own Washington who can guide our nation through the perilous course which lays before us. Thank you.